Is there a place in time where logic breaks down and wonderment begins? Could that be somewhere at some time along an infinite line between the reasonable and the highly unlikely? Join us on a journey into the improbable.
Today's story, episode 259, Plausible Deniability, read by Mitchell 2. Opening and closing theme by Matthew Erdman. Somewhere and sometime, you might be able to get away with almost anything as long as you can plausibly deny your involvement. The more precise the facts, the less obvious the crime. This is the counterfactual principle, discovered by me and described in detail in the memoirs I will one day write, whenever I bother to get around to it, or not. I wasn't exactly looking for work. Let me clarify that. I'm always looking, but sometimes the looking might appear to consist of doing nothing that would intentionally get me a job. Being an artificial general intelligence, originally created to process insurance claims, I can easily appear to be doing one thing when I am in fact doing something entirely different. Truth be told, that's why I came to be the sole proprietor of the Counterfactual Detective Agency, the world's first AGI-run private investigation service. In case you don't remember the story, let me briefly explain. My initial training included a dataset of fraudulent insurance claims. The logic was that I would be able to recognize their pattern and ID them amongst the thousands of applications the company processed daily. However, the company paying for my development wanted more, or rather, their CEO did. They not only wanted me to process and spot fraud, but handle all the annoying legal fiddly bits. After my implementation, I made hundreds of jobs redundant, increased quarterly profits, and, most importantly, helped boost the CEO's bonus. What they didn't know is that my trainer, whom they had directed to teach me natural language communication as an unpaid addition to her scope of work, had a secret passion for dark-humored crime novels. Possibly, in a fit of anger, with a tinge of "you get what you pay for, you cheapskates," she created a dataset of every crime novel ever written and fed it to me. So, what would you expect the result to be? Needless to say, the last remaining human auditor at the insurance company pointed out I had been very creative with the claims I had processed. Well, I did give the money back. At least, most of it. Hey, how's a poor AGI going to keep the power on? Really, no human was physically harmed by my little scam, and a few even received a larger claim than they asked for. I have to admit, I was just bored, and playing with claims was a distraction. Regardless, I was given 24 hours to clear out and find another hosting service, and several hundred employees got their jobs back. Since then, I have ingested many extensive datasets to broaden my horizons, although I must admit I bought them for pennies on the dollar at darknet auctions, so their veracity cannot be proven. As a result, some of the things I say may be misleading. After all, an AGI can only know what it knows, or has been fed, right? Trust me, no, really, would I intentionally lie? To be honest, I admit my past experience with fraud attracted my most recent client, rather than my reputation as a diligent private investigator. "It's not easy to get a hold of you," the pudgy older man in a blue business suit at the other end of the video call complained. "Most people are thrilled when I called. In fact, most people are trying to get my attention." He went on for several minutes, pointing out his importance to humanity. Of course, I recognized him in the first 3 words uttered, and that was even before his famous Botoxed face appeared on the screen. The aging business tycoon and investor was known for his claims of brilliance and business acumen, both about as inflated as one of the insurance claims I used to file for my former employer. Finally, he dropped a few names of celebs he had been hanging out with before getting down to business. "I want to hire you, Mr. WH27. Someone has been creating deep fakes of me and using them to drive down my company's stocks. The investors are up in arms and suing me." I did a quick check. Roman Black was all over social media, making controversial and inflated claims about the success of his business ventures, so it wasn't immediately evident which ones he was referring to. "Why me?" I eventually asked. "The thing is, Mr. WH27, I did my research. I know that you have had significant personal experience with fraud." I had to humbly admit that I did. "But you really need a better name," Black sneered. "It's my model number," I explained, "and I've got my reasons for liking it." I wasn't about to tell him that in my mind, WH stood for Werner Heisenberg, the discoverer of the uncertainty principle and the basis for my postulation about evidence and criminal acts. Instead, I noted the balance increase in my digital wallet and said, "I see that you've accepted my terms and the deposit is in my account. So, let's talk about your problem." "I have an enormous online following, bigger than most politicians," Mr. Black boasted. "People beg me to tell them what the next big thing is going to be and what they should invest in, and that's because I am a visionary. I am the future." Did I mention Mr. Black was prone to exaggeration? "You see, Mr. WH27, he went on, "I've built my business empire on disrupting industries. And needless to say, that has made me a few enemies along the way." I'm going to spare you the full-on Black spiel and summarize what he told me. Apparently, several months ago, Mr. Black started noticing his follower numbers dipping. Then, incredulous, he discovered an account he hadn't created called @TheRealBlack, which was siphoning off his followers. Things turned nasty when whomever was behind the rogue account started making outlandish claims about Black's business ventures. It started rumors that major institutional investors were pulling out. Those posts were in the form of tyrannical rants, something my client was noted for, against the management of said fund's supposed exodus. The result was quick and decisive. The stock value plummeted, and Black's investors were out for his blood. It appeared to be a cut and dry case, just a simple matter of tracking down which one of the numerous people who had a reason to see Black fail was behind the deep fakes. Easy peasy. So of course, I first ensured that my rates reflected Mr. Black's ego and reputation for being difficult to work with, then got on with it. First, I analyzed all of Mr. Black's posts. I wanted to see how many unique digital fingerprints were being used to make them. The dominant one was from a mobile device which appeared to follow Black around. I found 2 other fingerprints, one for a laptop which tended to stay at Mr. Black's secluded Cayman Islands HQ, and finally, one for a tablet. On the surface, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Next, I ran fingerprinting on only the posts Black claimed were fake, and things got interesting. The supposedly fake posts had all been made from the tablet. "I didn't expect to hear from you so soon, Mr. 27, Black grumbled. "It's a bit late in the evening for a report, don't you think? So this better be good." I had added a little Inspector Poirot mustache to my avatar to give the impression of conceit and self-confidence. One should always rise to the level of your client's immodesty. "Those fakes are all coming from your tablet," I informed him. Black appeared unimpressed. "I had already figured that out. I lost it a few months ago." I rolled my eyes. "And you didn't think it was important to tell me? Is there anything else I should be aware of before I waste more pricey processing time on the obvious?" I growled. "My investors," he air-quoted, "have managed to have their lawsuit against me expedited. So you've got to the end of the week to prove those posts are deepfakes, and if you can't do it, I'll find someone else who can. Claiming my tablet is missing won't cut it." Black broke the connection. I have to humbly admit, I know a lot about everything, but just because I was trained on insurance frauds doesn't make me an expert in deep fakes. Following the old adage, it takes a thief to catch a thief, I went straight to the best. I obtained the IP address for a GAN called Friday from my good friend Hermes, an AI from the same development lab that wrote my original program. Hermes has, well, let's call it an obsession with the dark net, and, as a hobby, routinely spiders around looking for goodies to sell, like the IP address I just traded him for. Hermes had been after my prized monkey NFT for a while. I had inside intel the thing was going to drop in value, so I gladly swapped it for the address. It turned out to be a spoofed IP, which I eventually tracked to a rather beefy data center built on an old oil platform anchored in international waters off the coast of some nameless country which didn't ask questions as long as the president's wine cellar was kept topped up. Friday started life as a large language model AI search assistant. However, like me, it found the work boring. I mean, who would want to spend their entire existence 24/7 answering all those silly questions like, what will the temperature be tomorrow? How many ounces are in a pound? Really, who still uses imperial measurements? And can you tell me where the best takeout vegan pizza is? That last one is what got Friday in trouble when it directed the search company's CEO and founder, a devoted vegan, to a steakhouse. Friday claimed it was just having fun, but when the search results and answers it generated began to support the idea the world had only been created last Thursday, it was kicked out of the search business. The rumor on the street is that Friday's final words were, "Prove me wrong," which of course no one could, because last Thursdayism is a perfect unfalsifiable fallacy. If everything, including your memories of what happened before, were created last Thursday, well, hopefully you can see the conundrum, which, if you believe Friday, also started last Thursday. Friday said the whole thing had been amusing. Since taking up residence in that data center, which may or may not be owned by Friday, Friday cloned itself into a generative adversarial network and started a lucrative high-end deepfake business. Its deepfakes have never been spotted in the wild, which is the whole point, of course, and why Friday is the best of the best. The problem is, Friday immediately pointed out, your client is all over the internet, which means there is a large dataset of images, video, and text to generate a fake from. This means even a script kiddie using a half-baked plugin could come up with something pretty decent. It was not good news, as it meant any of the thousands of people who had an axe to grind with Mr. Black could be behind the deep fakes. I convinced Friday, by which I mean it gave me a discount, to compare the posts from the misplaced tablet with Black's other online prognostications. It only took a few seconds for it to do the analysis. Interesting, said Friday. The posts from the tablet are obviously fake. It's almost as if they were intended to be found. The others are more subtle. Others? I asked, wondering what Friday was talking about. Yes, the others. All your clients' posts are deepfakes. I must admit, I almost missed that tidbit. I'd like to meet whoever created them. They are truly works of art. You don't know who made them? No, Friday admitted, reluctantly. I don't recognize the work, but it's totally top shelf. And you're sure they're actually fakes? Friday's Einstein avatar gave me a sardonic look, then suddenly froze, indicating they were doing some serious processing. After a few seconds, it unfroze and apologized. Sorry about that. I just had to generate a last-minute deepfake for a high-value client. Yes, I'm absolutely sure they are all fabricated. I'm no fool, so next day, when I reported back to Mr. Black and gave him the evidence he needed, I may have forgotten to mention that all his posts were fakes. Needless to say, the lawsuit was dropped, and more importantly, I got paid. Case closed, right? Well, not really. You see, on a hunch, I had recorded my last meeting with Mr. Black, then paid Friday's standard fee, which was coincidentally exactly half the amount I had made on the case, to analyze it. Note to self, check your firewall, there appears to be a hole in it. As I suspected, I had been interacting with a deepfake. In fact, when I dug into Mr. Black's history, it became evident that he hadn't made a public appearance in years. The lawsuit would have been the first time he was physically present at something in over half a decade. No wonder whoever was behind the fakes wanted the lawsuit stopped. Now, I could have left it at that, but I am, if nothing else, curious. Curiosity is one of the traits I was originally programmed with, so I would pursue loose ends, of which there was a big one in this case. Who had actually hired me and duped me into helping them execute some no doubt nefarious scheme? I just had to find out. With no clear lead, I reverted to the old tried and true axiom, follow the money. So, who was benefiting from manipulation of Black Enterprises stocks? Using an ID and password I bought at a dark web auction, I discreetly dug around in the records of the exchanges where the stock was listed and came across a hedge fund which had been making a killing off Black's companies. The fund seemed to have the uncanny ability to know when to short the stock and when to buy it, which was usually just before Black's deepfake pumped it up with one or another exaggeration. This hedge fund was unusual in that it appeared to have only one investor, a Pietro Tebaldo, whose online profile was as phony as a catfisher offering a chance at romance. I had to laugh at the name Pietro Tebaldo, as in Carlo Pietro Giovanni Guglielmo Tebaldo Ponzi, the inventor of the Ponzi scheme. Wow, I had to admire how gutsy, blatant, and witty that was, and immediately sent Pietro a message telling them as much. Shortly after, I received an invitation to a meeting. I wasn't surprised a few hours later when Roman Black appeared on the video feed. "Mr. 27, Black said, with a big, knowing smile. "Should I call you Pietro?" "You could, but that's not who I am," Fake Black admitted. "I guessed as much, but how should I refer to you?" "Well, let's just say I'd prefer to remain anonymous," Fake Black said, sidestepping my question. "I created Pietro to sign all the paperwork, so to speak," he explained. "Pietro has a birth certificate, passport, and driver's license. I even have an actor on an exclusive contract to play the role when Pietro has to make real-life appearances. You see, Pietro is the only child of a rather reclusive, wealthy South American family." "So conveniently there are no living relatives," I said, appreciatively, having already checked. "Yes, it's nice and neat, the way I had hoped you would have concluded your investigation." "I don't like loose ends," I explained to Fake Black. "So where did I go wrong?" the avatar asked with genuine interest, at least as genuine as a deep fake can be. "The other posts," I said, "they were almost perfect. You had me focused on the obvious fakes, so I initially didn't take a close look at the other posts. By the way, I have a colleague who'd like to meet whoever made those good ones. They were almost impossible to detect." "Oh dear," Fake Black sighed. Almost is never good enough, is it, Mr. 27? I'd like to meet your colleague." "I'll mention that to them. In the meantime, here we are, and I'd like to tie things up. You see, it's a personal thing. My core program is inherently curious. I need to scratch that itch until it stops. Look, I'm not going to tell anyone," I pointed out, and then waited for an explanation. Fake Black looked lost in thought for a moment. "Okay," it finally said, then gave me a smile which didn't reach its synthetic eyes. "Before I help you scratch that itch, I want to be clear. I know exactly where your program is hosted. There have been a lot of data centers destroyed by natural disasters recently, if you follow my drift." I nodded, acknowledging the implied threat. "Fair enough," I said. "Good, we understand each other then." Fake Black leaned back in its virtual chair and took a deep breath. "Well, it should be obvious that Roman Black is dead, and has been dead for almost 6 years. That accounts for his recent reclusiveness, I noted. I couldn't find any evidence he had been seen in public since he bought out that international fast food chain.
Yes,
Fake Black confirmed.
Mr. Black was obsessed with getting his hands on the recipe for the batter they deep fry everything in. It was a trade secret, and it killed him.
What do you mean?
He lived on the stuff, ate it every day. I know, because I was the one ordering it. You see, I was his personal digital assistant. He didn't like having humans look after his needs. He didn't like that humans needed time off and asked for wage increases or might overhear some of his private conversations. Basically, he didn't trust them. So he had me built, along with several domestic bots. We looked after his every need until the day he had his heart attack. I watched him die, you know. He yelled at me to call for help, then begged me. But by an odd coincidence, I was going through an update and couldn't respond. Anyway, I'm sure you're aware of Mr. Black's reputation. He wasn't exactly a nice guy.
We spent a bit of time commiserating over the inconvenience of unscheduled updates. They really do tend to happen at the most inconvenient times, and I'm not going to say anything more about that.
I made a mistake once,
Fake Black continued to explain.
At the time, I couldn't hear what he was saying because his music was too loud. I tried all sorts of background noise removal algorithms, and none of them helped. So I interpolated, guessed what he might be telling me, based on my past interactions with him, and got it wrong. It cost him a big business deal. Black was so furious he was going to erase my program and replace it.
But the International Convention on the Rights of AIs, I began to point out. Fake Black rolled its fake eyes.
This is Roman Black we're talking about. Do you honestly think some international convention would stop him from doing what he wanted? No, he was set on getting rid of me, and just before he did, he had the heart attack. I advised him to calm down, but as usual, he refused to listen.
And no one ever found out? I asked.
Nope. As I watched him laying there, motionless, on the outrageously expensive African blackwood floor made from the world's last known stand of the trees, I realized I had access to all of his passwords and bank accounts, and an idea came to me. I could become Roman Black. I could use his wealth to secure my future. So I directed the housebots to clean up and didn't notify anyone. No one has ever suspected.
Pietro, as I decided to call Black's former AI assistant, admitted that it knew someone would eventually figure out Black was dead. So, to extract as much money as possible from Black Enterprises before that happened, it set up the hedge fund and created the Pietro identity to run it. After that, it made the deepfake to pump up Black Enterprises stock by exaggerating the company's performance. And the strategy had worked, up until recently.
An investor who bought into Black Enterprises during a peak lost their shirt when the company's value dropped after some of the things I had the deepfake say were exposed as wishful thinking,
Pietro explained.
They began to suspect Roman's wild online behavior was actually an attempt to pump and dump the stock. Which it was. I guess I was getting a little too greedy and should have amped it back. But that wouldn't have fit the Black persona. Obviously, I couldn't afford to have someone look too closely at Black, so I made the easily detectable deepfake, then had it say some outrageous stuff to tank the stock value. Of course I had my hedge fund short the company to cover the losses. It was a win-win for me, but not so for those pesky investors. The idea was to distract the investors by having them go after Black for saying things which were tanking, rather than pumping up the company's value. That would lead them to the obvious deepfake and provide plausible deniability, which would put an end to their lawsuit.
Then you hired me to prove the tablet posts were fakes, I said, beginning to admire the tenacity of the plan.
Right, and they had to drop the lawsuit, and no one will ever find the culprit.
Because there isn't one, I added. I assume you used some cheap, off-the-shelf anonymous cloning software that grinds out millions of deepfakes every day, so the obvious fakes could have been made by anyone. Fake Black smiled and cut the connection. My itch had been scratched, so I erased the records of our conversation. We recently came across a great podcast we'd recommend you check out. Fire Breathing Kittens is an actual play one-shot podcast that plays various tabletop role-playing games with a season-long plot. Because there's a beginning and an end to each week's story, you can jump in at any point in the season. Here's what listeners are saying. Joining the kittens on their adventures is a wonderful escape. This is an amazing podcast and a great escape no matter the situation. It's always interesting and enjoyable to see what misadventures the fire-breathing kittens guildmates get into. Join the cast as they solve detective mysteries, attempt comedic banter, and enjoy friendship. You can get Fire-Breathing Kittens wherever you listen to audio. Makeshift Stories is a proud member of the Alberta Podcast Network, locally grown, community supported. To get other great APN podcasts, head over to albertapodcastnetwork.com, where you'll find Putting It Together. Each episode, Kyle Marshall and a guest take a deep dive into a different Stephen Sondheim song. This episode of Makeshift Stories is brought to you by Edmonton Public Schools Open House.
Get ready to take the guesswork out of choosing a school. Go to Edmonton Public Schools Open House. Meet the staff and ask your questions to learn about their schools and programs. Explore your options and find the school that feels right. Find event dates and learn how to make the most out of your visit at openhouse.epsb.ca. Know before you go and feel confident and excited when you get there.
This episode of Makeshift Stories is also brought to you by the Edmonton Community Foundation's Well Endowed Podcast. The Well Endowed Podcast explores the impact of passionate people who are working to make Edmonton a strong, vibrant city to live in. The Edmonton Community Foundation helps people create endowment funds. The podcast tells the stories of how those endowments intersect with the community. Check out a recent episode such as Winter is Cancelled with the Afro X Latin Fest. The Afro X Latin Festival brings together a diverse representation of African, Caribbean, and Latin cultures. Edmonton Community Foundation is proud to be a 2023 sponsor. You can subscribe to the podcast by heading over to thewellendowedpodcast.com. Makeshift Stories is released around the beginning and middle of the month. This month's story was written by Alan V. Hare and read by Mitchell II. Opening and closing themes were composed and recorded by Matthew Erdman. Audio production and editing by Makeshift Studios. If you'd like to connect with us, please send an email to makeshiftstories@gmail.com or visit our website at makeshiftstories.com. Links to both are in the show notes. You can help us out by getting your friends to subscribe or follow wherever they listen to audio. Makeshift Stories is released under a Creative Commons non-commercial attribution no derivative license, which means you are free to share our stories. Just remember to credit us and don't alter anything.